Picture this. You're in a classroom where culture is being discussed, and someone insists that culture only means Shakespeare, opera, or fine art. Raymond Williams, one of the most influential Marxist theorists of the 20th century, would immediately interrupt and say, culture is ordinary. Yes, this phrase itself was asked in exam. For Williams, culture was never limited to elites or the arts. He insisted it was a whole way of life, including everyday practices, beliefs, and institutions. He further explained that culture always consists of dominant, residual, and emergent forms. And here's the key point. The masses actively create cultural values, they don't just consume them. Pause here and note this carefully. Because all these elements, culture as ordinary, culture as a whole way of life, culture as dominant, residual, and emergent, and the masses as cultural participants have been asked in exam. Williams also gave us three general conceptions of culture: the ideal culture as the pursuit of human perfection, the documentary culture as records in literature and art, and the social culture as a lived process. And yes, this tripartite model was also asked in exam. Now, let's turn to his biggest theoretical contribution, cultural materialism. Drawing from Marxism, but shaping it in his own way, Williams treated culture as a productive process, part of society's means of production. He showed how residual, emergent, and oppositional elements in culture constantly interact with dominant forces. Later, critics like Alan Sinfield and Jonathan Dollimore expanded this into political Shakespeare, defining cultural materialism through four principles: historical context, close textual analysis, political commitment, and theoretical method. Can you recall Williams's major books? Let's go in order: Culture and Society from 1958, then The Long Revolution in 1961, where he analyzed 350 canonical writers between 1470 and 1920, asked in exam. After that came Marxism and Literature in 1977, Writing in Society in 1983, and The Politics of Modernism in 1989. This exact sequence was asked in exam. Don't miss Keywords, published in 1976. Here, Williams unpacked contested cultural terms and retained three enduring definitions of culture: intellectual development, art as a whole, and a way of life. This too has been asked in exam. And if you want the full list for revision, here it is: Preface to Film, 1954, Culture and Society, 1958. Notes: Towards the Definition of Culture, 1958, The Long Revolution R, 1961, Modern Tragedy, 1966, The Country and the City, 1973, Keywords, 1976, Marxism and Literature, 1977, Writing in Society, 1983, and The Politics of Modernism, 1989. So, what was Williams's lifelong project? To democratize culture. He showed that culture is not the property of elites but the shared, contested, and lived experience of society. By insisting on its ordinariness and materiality, he laid the foundation for cultural studies as we know it today. Imagine a thinker who could connect politics, media, race, and culture and show us how power is woven into everyday life. That thinker was Stuart Hall, born in Jamaica in 1932 and later one of the most important voices in British cultural studies. Hall worked alongside Richard Hoggart and Raymond Williams to establish the Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies at the University of Birmingham. Pause here and note this. Hall emphasized that British cultural studies grew out of ideological breaks and realignments, asked in exam. He joined CCCS in 1964 at Hoggart's invitation, became acting director in 1968, and served as its official director from 1972 to 1979. Long before this, in the 1950s, he had co-founded the New Left Review, blending activism with intellectual debate. Now, here's where Hall becomes crucial for theory. Deeply influenced by Antonio Gramsci, he placed the concept of hegemony at the center of cultural studies, asked in exam. For Hall, culture wasn't a passive mirror of the economy. It was an active battlefield where meanings were produced, contested, and redefined. This made cultural studies a living political project, bringing in questions of race, ethnicity, gender, and media. He also integrated Foucault's ideas about discourse and power into his framework. But perhaps Hall's most famous contribution is his model of encoding and decoding developed in 1973. This is absolutely key, so pause here and note it carefully. His model showed that communication is not a one-way transmission but a process with 5 stages: production to circulation, to distribution, to consumption, to reproduction, asked in exam. At the production stage, a message is encoded within institutions and ideologies. During circulation, the message takes shape in its medium, say television or film. In consumption, the audience interprets the message, drawing on their own cultural codes. And in reproduction, audiences may resist, negotiate, or accept the meaning. Hall's brilliance was in showing that audiences are not passive, they actively decode messages. This insight gave birth to reception theory, proving that media culture is always contested, never fixed. Can you recall what this means for ideology? Exactly, it means dominant ideas can always be resisted. Audiences don't just absorb, they argue, reinterpret, and sometimes subvert the intended message. Hall reinforced this in essays like The Rediscovery of Ideology, Return of the Repressed in Media Culture and Communication Studies. So, when you think of Stuart Hall, remember these anchors: CCCS at Birmingham, Gramsci's hegemony, Foucault's discourse, and most importantly, the encoding-decoding model. Several of these have been asked in exam, making Hall a central figure you must not skip. Picture a group of teenage boys in a working-class English school during the 1970s. They joke, resist authority, mock teachers, and build their own youth culture. On the surface, it looks like rebellion. But here's the twist: this rebellion doesn't liberate them. Instead, it pushes them right back into the same working-class jobs their parents had. This is what Paul Willis discovered in his groundbreaking ethnographic study, Learning to Labor, How Working-Class Kids Get Working-Class Jobs, published in 1977. Willis, associated with the Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies, showed that schools are not just places of learning, they are sites of social reproduction. Through culture, identity, and peer practices, students end up reproducing the very class structures they try to resist. Pause here and note this. This insight is key for understanding how education is tied to culture, ideology, and inequality. Now let's shift to Angela McRobbie, born in 1951, another leading voice from the Birmingham School, deeply influenced by Stuart Hall, asked in exam. McRobbie's work focuses on feminism, media, and popular culture, especially the lives of young women. Pause here. One of her important theoretical contributions is the concept of the third-person reflexive gaze, asked in exam. This describes how women learn to monitor themselves as if they are always being observed by others, shaping their identities through this constant awareness. In her book, The Aftermath of Feminism from 2008, McRobbie uses Foucault's ideas to examine how young women are shaped by technologies of gender, subtle processes that present them as empowered subjects, but within the limits of neoliberal culture. Later, in Be Creative, Making a Living in the New Culture Industries, published in 2016, she studied precarious labor in the creative industries, showing how new forms of work exploit flexibility while undermining security.